Hi everyone, I'm Matt from Looking to Bitcoin, and today we're going to be looking at Bitcoin versus other assets. To do this, we'll be using a number of resources that are all freely available on lookintobitcoin.com, your number one source for Bitcoin information. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to ensure you're receiving all of our content as soon as it's released. So right now we're just here on the Bitcoin live price page here on lookintobitcoin.com, and as we can see here, we're looking at the Bitcoin performance versus a number of different assets such as the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, and stocks such as Tesla and Apple. And as you can see, over the past 6 months, pretty much since Bitcoin's price bottomed out, we have actually outperformed most of these other assets we're compared to quite substantially. However, on certain timeframes, we might see underperformance compared to Tesla, which has performed exceptionally well recently, and on longer timeframes again we might see that we're vastly outperforming more traditional baseline performance such as the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones. But while we can do this basic simple oversight comparison, what we can actually do is use something like TradingView and actually compare Bitcoin to other assets that maybe aren't necessarily available here, assets such as gold and oil, to maybe get a better comparison and a better understanding of the value appreciation of Bitcoin rather than just comparing it to its USD valuation. So if we go to this TradingView chart here, you can see I've just loaded up the BTC USD chart, and as I film this, Bitcoin's at about 26,670 US dollars. So obviously not a bad price, especially considering we were just about $15,000 or $16,000 a few months ago, and especially considering we were just a few cents only a decade ago. But if rather than comparing to the US dollar, like we said, we compared to other assets, how does Bitcoin actually look? If we compare to something that maybe isn't devaluing, such as fiat currencies, what about oil, which traditionally has been a good measure of value, cost, and appreciation due to its utility and basically the fuel of the world? So here I've loaded up the Bitcoin versus oil chart, and immediately it might look pretty similar, and that's because, well, it is quite similar. The price of oil, while it is moving pretty constantly like most assets, it's not moving very substantially, not like Bitcoin anyway, which has multi-$1,000 swings to the upside. But if I just add on the standard Bitcoin chart here in orange, you can see there are some differences. So we can see here right now as I film this, one Bitcoin would buy you 374 barrels of oil, which isn't too bad if you need a lot of oil, I guess. But we can see, compared to where Bitcoin peaked, where the USD and the oil charts were actually pretty similar when comparing with Bitcoin, we actually dipped quite a bit lower when pricing Bitcoin in barrels of oil. Maybe this is because the price of oil actually rallied quite a bit higher, just as the natural demand and cyclical asset prices sort of change in the ever-growing market conditions. So this might be a better idea of how we can actually evaluate cryptocurrencies. So here we're on the Bitcoin compared to gold valuations. So as I film this, one Bitcoin would buy you 14 ounces of gold. Of course, there might be a little bit of discrepancy there. If you walk into a gold dealer with one Bitcoin, there may be a little bit of differences in valuations there. But according to this, one Bitcoin will buy you 14 ounces of gold. And what I've done is loaded up the price of gold here, this yellow line, so we can actually get a little bit more of a direct comparison. As well, if I add on the standard BTC price chart, we can see they are also pretty similar here. But more recently, we can see that the Bitcoin valuated in gold, again, is actually down compared to Bitcoin compared to its valuation in USD. And this is due to the fact that gold has actually appreciated fairly substantially in price over the last few months. Pretty much coinciding with the Bitcoin price bottom, we can see that gold has actually increased fairly substantially in value. Now, in terms of percentage gains, Bitcoin has actually moved up quite a bit more than gold. But once we're actually comparing Bitcoin to another tangible asset, something that isn't the US dollar, which is almost constantly losing valuation, just like most other fiat currencies, we maybe get a little bit more of an accurate idea of how Bitcoin's actually performing. And using ratios like these, we actually get a great idea of how we could potentially more efficiently allocate our capital. So we're not just within Bitcoin or US dollar, maybe at certain periods of time we could realize that rotating into assets such as gold, oil, or even the S&P 500 may make more sense. So here again, as we said, this is Bitcoin versus the S&P 500, and once again I'm going to load up the S&P 500 chart so we can just get a direct comparison of how the actual price of the S&P 500 is reacting and causing differences in the Bitcoin price. So we can see here again, compared to the standard Bitcoin price chart, we are seeing a little bit of an underperformance compared to the standard USD valuation, once more due to the fact that the S&P 500 is actually increasing in value. But interestingly enough, if we look at times such as the previous all-time high in 2017, we could see Bitcoin compared to the price of the S&P actually increased beyond that of its USD valuation. And this is likely due to the fact that maybe at that period of time the S&P was actually losing value. So there are periods of time where holding Bitcoin compared to other assets and even compared to the US dollar makes a lot more sense. And what we can also do is measure how much Bitcoin you could buy with one of these assets. So if we just do the ticket in reverse rather than BTC, USD, SPX, which I did on TradingView for this, but if we again price the S&P 500 in Bitcoin, we can see that for one S&P 500 index, you would only get 0.16 Bitcoin. And if we actually scroll back a lot, you can see here, compared to when Bitcoin was first created and traded as an asset, where you could buy hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin for one S&P index, we can see Bitcoin's actually appreciating in value rather substantially versus other hard assets. I think one other great insight you can actually get from charts like these is if we measure something like the S&P 500 compared to gold. Now, these assets are usually inversely correlated, so usually when the S&P 500 is rising in price, we usually see gold decreasing in price, and vice versa. And as gold is usually seen as a hedge asset, something to diversify into, maybe weather the storm of a downturn in equities, a lot of people usually use gold as more of a safe haven asset, as opposed to something that they're investing in, hoping for exponential gains in price. Now, obviously, at certain periods, it does have that exponential gain, and charts like these may help us identify them a little clearer. So this is, again, the S&P 500 compared to gold. And we can see right now, one S&P 500 index is valued at 2.2 ounces of gold. But again, this is a very cyclical asset based on decades of different price action. And if we load up the S&P 500 here, we can actually see once gold starts outperforming, once we see this blue line start to decrease exponentially, meaning that the S&P 500's purchasing power of ounces of gold decreases fairly noticeably, it usually indicates a really long drawn out recessionary period or just a stagnating price period for the S&P 500. We can see periods such as here where we saw a huge decrease, that the S&P 500 took decades after this Great Depression to actually regain its previous all-time high. And once again here, after we saw this big decrease in the 1970s into the early 80s, it took again about a decade for the S&P 500 to regain its all-time high. Once again here, following the dot-com bubble and into the 2008 financial crisis, the same thing happened. And right now we can see from these white lines I've drawn on the chart here, it may even starting to be indicate that we're maybe going to get this slight downturn in purchasing power of the S&P 500 compared to gold, which historically has lined up with these great, long, drawn-out, almost bear markets that we see in equities and other risk-on assets. So definitely something to keep an eye on. And a lot of these ratios are very interesting, especially, like I said, when you need to consider what asset is going to be the most bang for your buck and where the opportunity cost is in your investments. But just as a general quick oversight, I think this is a good way to really see the power of Bitcoin compared to these hard assets, and even comparing other hard assets like the S&P 500 to hedge assets like gold to see where we may be in a market cycle. So just to summarize, comparing Bitcoin to other assets and commodities can often give us better insights into the value appreciation of Bitcoin, as opposed to only measuring versus the price of the US dollar and other fiat currencies. And using these custom ratios and comparisons, we can also better adjust our trading, investing, and analysis to maximize our opportunity cost and more efficiently manage our capital. We can also use these comparisons to potentially gain some insight into likely market conditions going forward, like we saw the S&P 500 and gold chart, which has accurately predicted long, drawn-out recessionary bear cycles in equity and more risk-on assets. So definitely worth keeping an eye on these charts we've covered today. If you like this video, then please visit lookintobitcoin.com, where you can also consider becoming a site subscriber to gain access to live charts, in-depth newsletters, indicator alerts, private TradingView scripts, and more, all for a fraction of the standard industry price. And let me know in the comments down below, do you ever use these ratios to see custom comparisons of assets versus other assets? We do have some more traditional ones, crypto specific, on this live price page here with ETH versus BTC, so we can see the purchasing power of crypto's two biggest assets. But are there any others you use? Are there any other insights you find interesting? Let me know in the comments down below and on social media. I look forward to reading and replying to all of them. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.